Hello and welcome to the biology topic of reproduction, lesson 2, the menstrual cycle. In the previous lesson, we looked at the human reproductive systems and we looked at the male system and the female system. This lesson, we're taking a closer look at the menstrual cycle. So we're specifically looking at the female reproductive system. And we need to think about what the menstrual cycle is and why it's important. Now, the menstrual cycle takes around 28 days. And it starts during puberty. It's one of the signals that puberty is taking place. The menstrual cycle is the cycle that prepares the female body for pregnancy. But this cycle will stop during pregnancy. Okay, so the cycle will take around 28 days. This differs from person to person. So we work on an average. And when we're answering questions about this in a test, we need to have the 28 days as a factor in our mind so that we think about it with that. We know it's different from one person to another, but for the point of the test, we work on an average that's around 28 days. Okay, the menstrual cycle is getting the female body ready for the uterus to receive a fertilized egg, because the aim of the menstrual cycle is that the body is producing an egg and the egg wants to be fertilized to produce a baby in the long term. If the uterus does not receive the fertilised egg, then the uterus lining and the unfertilised egg are lost from the body. And this is what is known as a period. And the blood is lost through a vagina. So as a female is going through puberty and the periods start, this is why. Okay, so this means from this point onwards, that person can become pregnant because they are releasing the eggs. Now, you need to know what happens to the uterus lining during this time. And quite commonly, we're shown this in a graph. So if we take a little look at the graph, you've got a rough sketch there of the days on the bottom, on the x-axis, and the thickness of the uterus lining. And you can see that they change. Right, so on day 1, the uterus lining will begin to break down. That's when the bleeding occurs, and that's the period, okay? And the blood will leave the body through the vagina, okay? That period can last for a couple of days, on average about 4 or 5 days. Some people, we know it lasts as long as 7 or 10 days. For the purpose of this, we're working on 4 days, okay? So after day 4, or around day 4, the uterus lining will begin to build again. Okay, and that's because the aim of the game is that the uterus wants to prepare to receive a fertilized egg, okay, a fertilized ovum. To do that, it needs to be thick and ready because the egg will want to implant. So on day 14, we are ready, and it is thought that that's when ovulation happens. An egg will be released from the ovary and will very slowly move through the fallopian tube. Okay, whilst it's in the fallopian tube, that's where you expect fertilization to happen. Okay, if fertilization happens, the rest of this graph does not happen because you will hopefully have there will hopefully be a successful pregnancy. However, if fertilization does not happen, the rest of the graph occurs, and what happens is you can see that the thickness of the uterus lining decreases, okay? Because the uterus lining is breaking down, because the uterus lining hasn't received the fertilized egg. Now, all of this is hormone controlled, so the presence or absence of those hormones will then signal what's going to happen, and at around day 38, the uterus lining will break down, okay? And then we go back on this cycle and start back here, and the period would begin. Now, the absence of that period beginning would be one of the first signs of a pregnancy and of a fertilized egg being received. Okay, quite often they'll use that graph in a test, or they'll ask you what happens at certain days. So I think you need to know what happens on day 1, 4, 14 and 28, whilst remembering that can be different in different people. The days vary. Some people may ovulate on day 11, some may ovulate on day 16, for example. But for the purpose of the test, you're going to use those days, okay? And what you need to do now is go and have a little look at the worksheet and be able to explain what happens on each day. And then we'll see you again very soon for lesson 3.